Hello everybody, I'm Gabriel Del Santo and this is Pro Indie Dev Live. Thank you very much for being here to our 10th lecture. So this is the 10th Sunday in a row where we are here discussing in depth the real trenches of professional independent game development. And today we are going to discuss in depth one of the tools that you can have to start making money for your company, right? So many people have been asking me about B2B games. What is B2B? How to get into that model to start making money, even if you're not into a point in your career yet where you can make highly competitive games in the B2C markets like Steam or the Epic Store or maybe consoles. If you're not there yet, you still have ways of actually making money and injecting cash into your game development studio, right? So you can buy software, you can hire people, you can pay yourself, buy food, pay your rent, all this important stuff. And this is one realistic option for many of you. So many people have been asking me, and how you can do that, how get into this model to start making some money sooner, what is a realistic approach, and we are going to cover all that, right? So thank you very much for being here. Once again, expect a deep lecture. It will not be 1 hour long, probably it will be a little bit over that, and I'll be showing all the practical stuff, everything you need to know to get started, right? So you don't need to study anything else. Probably if you know some game development, you can already start applying all this stuff right after watching this lecture, right? So what is B2B? It's basically development for hire, right? So instead of you developing a game, you developing your own IP and putting there on the market for it to sell to final customers. Instead, you get hired by a company to develop games for them, right? So there are different models. So some of the examples here, and don't worry about taking notes right now because I'll be going to my whiteboard in a second and I'll go in depth into all of that. But we are talking about stuff like advergames. That's, games that are a form of advertisement, right? So advergames, educational games, health-related games, gamification projects. There are serious games. So there's all these different categories of games that can be, that for one reason or another, someone needs a game, someone who's not a game developer, like a company that does something else, and they need a game. They don't have the expertise within their employees, and so they hire someone to make games for them, right? And this is where you come in and you show them your portfolio and you basically enchant them with your proposal on how their games could be and should be if they work with you, and hopefully you get a contract and you get a paycheck before you even start development, right? So this is how it goes when it goes well, and sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it does. I'll tell you everything you need to know to avoid problems and to maximize your odds of actually landing some good contracts. All right, so I'm going to talk about values, basically give you a range, how you can calculate that. There's some stuff that I can share from my past contracts with customers, other stuff I cannot, for their protection because I haven't asked for their permission. But I'll be telling as much as I can on how I structure my contracts within my company and how this has worked really well with real customers. We are going to talk about how to deal with customer customization requests, how not to get overwhelmed by them wanting to change the game over and over and over up until a point where it's just not profitable for you anymore. So how you handle that. And I'll even be showing 3 of the games that my studio has already developed under that model, right? So as usual, this lecture and everything we do at Pro Indie Dev is meant for the warriors, right? So if you're someone who only wants to dream about making games but is not willing to put hard work and smart work, then probably this is not going to be a fun lecture for you to watch. This is for people who want to learn and to start considering the possibility of applying and then going there and doing the work, right? And if you are among those people, I always like to offer you a superpower if you stay to the end, right? So today, your superpower will be that if you decide that B2B games are something that makes sense for you, then you know how you get clients, how you negotiate a contract, how you develop the game, how do you manage the relationship with that client, and how you get paid and make some real money for your studio, right? And once again, I'm starting to detect a pattern here, after starting to make these lectures and, looking for similar stuff on YouTube. And I really don't think there is anything nearly this deep or this complete, probably not even in paid trainings, let alone for free, which is what we do here every single Sunday. So I'm super proud to be basically, cutting the grass here and, starting starting some movements on how you can effectively become professional, right? If you want. So this is one option that has been used, B2B has been used by many of my friends and myself, and it does work. It does generate money, and it is a good option for many people. So I will tell everything that you need to know to make a decision if this is for you or not. All right. So I'm going to start sharing our always handy whiteboard, and we are about to get started. All right. So today we are going to talk about B2B games, also known as game development for hire, also known by whom? By me. I don't know if other people call this that or not, and honestly, I don't care. The important thing here is that this is what it is. Okay. So B2B, first things first, right? What B2B means? Business to business, right? So this is kind of the opposite, or it's not exactly the same thing as B2C, which is business to customer, right? So business to customer is, for example, you developing a game for Steam or for consoles, and the customer is hanging in those platforms and they will be buying your game. So you're making your game directly to them, right? You are selling them directly to them through Steam. There is an intermediary, however, you are making the game to attend to the demands of an end customer, right? When you talk B2B, you are developing a game for a company, right? It's not only that the company is paying you to develop the game for them, which is the case, but also it means that it's trying to fulfill different design parameters, and the game will end up being a little bit different from what you would see on Steam, for example, right? So this is what B2B means and B2C. So when you hear me talking in future lectures, or you heard me talking in past lectures about making games both in B2B and the B2C market, this is what I mean, right? So usually I find this really productive if you are in a point where you are still not capable of making super competitive B2C games, but you are already capable of developing games and making something that works and that has value to someone, right? So let me start listing some practical examples, some real examples. This can be stuff like advergames. So what is an advergame? It's an advertising game. It's basically, if you are an advertiser, you can make a campaign and it will have like banners on the internet, and you can buy, I don't know, a spot on TV or whatever. There's all these different forms of advertising, and one of the medium that you can use is making a game for your brand, right? So maybe it's something to build awareness around your brand. For example, you want to look really cool for young people because you want them to know your sneakers brand or something like that. Then you can hire some company to develop a game where maybe, I don't know, it's a runner game, and when you get those sneakers you get like a superpower, and then this is kind of tying the image of this cool brands actually making you faster, for example. So if this is the briefing, this is the marketing briefing that the company has hired you to develop, this is one way where you can make an advertising game, right? So advergame is one of these possibilities. Educational games. These are, games that fulfill an educational purpose, right? That is teaching someone to do something, or teaching someone some sort of concepts that they need to get into their heads. And one good way to make it, easier to understand or more fun to experience and go through the lessons is through a gamified experience, right? So this can be like making some, for you want the most simple example I can think of is you want to teach like a kid some history concepts, then you make, I don't know, maybe a little adventure game that teaches what were the facts, what happened, the adventure, transform that fact into an adventure. Or maybe you can do a math game, and it's like a puzzle game for kids where they understand and learn how to add numbers or something like that, right? So games that are meant to have some sort of educational purpose. You can make health related games, which is very often games that are used for some sorts of therapeutic purpose, right? So basically helping someone to heal through games. And I'm going to show 2 practical examples of that my studio has developed. It was a really beautiful work that we had the opportunity to participate and to develop the games for that company. So I'm going to show you, and it also made us some good money. So that is always good as well, right? We also have gamification projects. So that's, you have heard this term over and over by now probably, but something that is not a game taking the benefits of, gamified paradigms. Or let's make this a little bit easier to understand. So the benefits of game paradigms. So for example, you want someone to go through your training, right? You want them to watch all the lessons, and they are, they get distracted, they go do something else. So many people only go through 10% of your training, and you want them to reach at least 30% of your training on average, right? Some people will get to the end, some people will not. It's just like YouTube videos. The warriors stay to the end, but some people just get distracted, want to do something more fun, and they end up not understanding that this is work. This also happens when you have some sort of education product, right? And one way to improve that can be to develop a game where you earn points by watching lectures, right? And you can exchange that for something that you want, right? So either you are accumulating gems, or you are maybe you can accumulate gems by watching lectures, and with those gems you can purchase within the training like a special lecture about one subject that the customer finds really, really interesting, for example. Or maybe they can unlock some sort of badge in the students community or something like that. So these are ways to make something fun by employing the logic and the paradigms and some design aspects of games into things that would traditionally not have those things, right? So we have been seeing that all over the place, because gamification was a buzzword like probably 10 years ago. Now it's kind of everywhere, but still there are gamification projects. People are more aware than ever that this is a real thing, and so there's more people than ever also hiring some somewhat experienced studios to develop gamified experiences for them, right? For the companies, for their products, and all that. So these are some real examples of what this can be. Let me see, because there are other types as well, and I will not be talking about them, right? So I will not be talking today about being paid upfront by game portals and casual game publishers, because this is one model that exists as well and that you should know, right? I have not worked personally with this model. I know the what's it called? The backstage of browser game portals. I have worked, gave consulting to some, and so I understand how this works. I have not, as a game studio, developed games for portals, in a long time. It's been almost like 7 years since last game I developed in that particular model. And this can be interesting, and you can make games for portals, and like some browser portal that has free games and people just go there and play the games, and you can develop that, and maybe you can even convince that portal or some specialized casual publisher to buy your game from you, right? So that they can monetize that, but they can give you like $2,000 in advance, for example. So this is a real way to make money. So back in the day, Big Fish Games was one of the options to go through that route, right? And this was like the range of money that you could make, maybe a little bit more, a little bit less, but $2,000 was not an unusual value. But you're not going to focus on that today at all. So just because I always like to give some sort of tip, if you are here to learn about this specifically, trying to make games and trying to get paid by specialized publishers, or even by the portals themselves, it might be worth it if you have experience in making casual games. I think so. You could like develop something, for example, that you are considering putting on a portal. Then you, instead of uploading the game when it's almost finished or finished, instead of uploading that, you try and talk to several potential casual publishers and portals to see if someone wants to buy an exclusivity deal from you, right? So instead of you putting all over the place your game, maybe someone will be willing to pay for you for that game, and they will be the ones making money by showing ads, usually by showing ads around your game, right, or within your game. So this is one way you can do that, right? So you can develop for the portal, you can, talk to lots of people, see if someone buy the game from you. If nobody does, then you just upload the game yourself in several portals and try to make some ad money with that, right? So just go to a company like Y8 or Pokey, or I don't know, if you want to approach a publisher, you can go to Big Fish, or I don't know, whoever is doing what Big Fish did. Nowadays you can research that, but this is basically how you could do that. And I think, for whom I recommend that, I think it's a good idea to develop for casual portals like itch.io, for example, if you're still just learning, or if you're just trying to get some feedback to a prototype. I think that's a good idea. At some point, when you are capable of developing something that's polished enough, that's complete enough, that's deep enough, I'm not, saying you should be making like something like AAA level, but something that's already good and well polished for a niche audience, I usually would recommend people to go to somewhere like Steam, for example, sell directly on Steam. You will usually be making more money. Now, I said that this might be the case for people who are already used to making casual games, because some types of games just do better on casual portals than on Steam, and vice versa. But if you don't know where to get started, I would recommend, this is one route for you to start monetizing, and even if you're not really good yet, because you will be competing against games that are not super polished either. Some of them are, but most of them are not. And so it's a little bit easier to be competitive, even though there's lots more competitors, both on any portal like Y8 or Pokey, for example, or if you go to something like itch.io, right? So it's more competitive. You'll probably be making less money, but the barrier of entrance for you to make something that's polished enough to be there and not be, really, really bad is lower, because, it's the general polish level of these games is a little bit lower, right? So this is all I had about this particular model today, so we will not be talking about that. Instead, we are talking about gamification projects, health-related games, education games, advert games, and other types of games that I have not listed here, but that are clearly meant for companies that would traditionally not care about games, right, or about game development in general, right? So this is what we're talking about today. All right, so the basic structure we'll be talking about how to get into B2B development, right? So this entails, this entails prereqs that you need to fulfill, how to get clients. This is a very important part, of course. I will be, I'll be showing practical examples, be showing my own game. I think actually this is, yes, all right. So I'll be showing some practical examples. Then I will also be talking about approaching or getting approached for a particular project, which will be a natural consequence of you doing some outreach work here in the how to get clients parts. We'll be talking about proposal, how you propose, how make a proposal, how you come up with some design that will help the clients, and how you put the pricing in that. So pricing. What else? Contracts. Getting paid, which is logistics for charging them. Customer relationship, which is something that you have to do during your development, of course, so that at the end of the development cycle you are happy, you are getting paid, and the customer is very happy for what they are receiving, and the contract has been fair to both parts, right? So how to make sure that everything works correctly, and having a good customer relationship is an essential part of that. Okay, so we will get started with how to get into B2B, and more specifically, which are the prerequisites. So let's get started with this list. And we need to format things, make them really pretty, because we'll be looking at them for 1 hour or more. So prerequisites, what you need to be worrying about even before you get or you consider getting into that. And I need to find my lecture notes. So I'm just stalling you guys and just talking random stuff while I find my lecture notes. Okay, so the first thing is you need to develop a portfolio, right? What does that mean? Basically having finished some games, having something to show, right? It doesn't have to be like a huge game. You don't need to be like Nintendo or Ubisoft. You just need to have some finished games, because otherwise, if I was looking for someone to develop a game for me and you approached me and said, hey, I can do that, the very first thing I would ask is, really? So what have you done, right? And you would be like, oh, actually, I never finished anything. I'm stuck forever in a 3 years long project, but I swear that your project will not take 3 years to be finished. That's not very convincing, right? Now, if you have participated in game jams, like maybe, I don't know, 7 game jams, and you managed to finish a decent looking game in 5 of those game jams, you can pick like the top 3, the top 3 better looking ones, and show that to the customer, right? So, but you have to develop a portfolio somehow. If you want to have ideas on how to start developing a good portfolio, something that's really attractive, I can give you some tips on some lecture in the future. But I just want to get over with the prereqs part so that you have like a broader understanding. Then I'll give you some very high level tips to help you at least get started. You also need to have a professional looking website, right? This should be basic, but so many people just don't understand that. Once again, you are telling that customer, you are approaching a customer or potential customer and saying that you are capable of developing a game. And if you can develop games, they would think that you are the computer guy, right? I don't know if this happens to you. This happens to me a lot, where every single person in my family know that I make games, and so I can also fix their cell phones and I can fix their computers. That's what they think, right? Because I'm making games, I'm the computer guy. Well, you know what? That kind of makes sense. You are tech savvy. If you can make games, you can probably put together a website and making that website look decent, at least, right? Either you are developing the website, or you're paying someone to do that, or you're hiring something like, I don't know, I think it's called Wix. Something, I don't know, the bare minimum that actually gets the job done. But you need to have something like some sort of online presence, right? So some sort of online presence. It has to look professional enough. So well polished, right? It doesn't need to be like a super production, just like your games that don't need to be necessarily, but they can't be too rough around the edges, right? So make something that looks decent enough, and that thing will host your portfolio. That's where you'll be directing traffic or directing customers to look at. Oh, hey, here is my website. Just go there and see what my games are like, and you'll see that I can make this game that you want, right? But that's one of the things that it will be doing. Also, you need to have a company, how to call that, a page that's optimized for companies to see. Because if you get into the, I don't know, for example, Super Mario website, it's meant for the final customer, right? So it's all colorful and it's all speaking player-centric language. And if you don't know what that is, keep watching these lectures, because we'll be covering a lot of marketing stuff that's really important for professional game developers. And by the way, I just realized that I have not talked about this today. This is mandatory, right? So hopefully by now you already know proindiedev.com/guide, and you have already gone to this page, because this is how you can keep track of everything that we do here at ProIndieDev, right? So this is how we work. Every Sunday I'm here giving a free lecture in depth about some really important subject for professional independent game developers. Here's how it works. Here's places where you can follow. I find it easier to just follow everywhere, and if you want you can unfollow later, but just so that you can see what kind of content we put there. Bare minimum, I would recommend Instagram and YouTube, right? So just come here, follow, because on YouTube you get notifications about new lectures sometimes. It's not super trustworthy, but sometimes it will notify you. And Instagram, because it allows you to ask questions directly to me, right? So you can literally just add me and send a direct message, and I'm answering any doubts that you have. So the Q&A for these lectures is done throughout the week over Instagram. So if you're watching this, you have any doubts, you can either ask on the chat if you are watching this as I'm broadcasting it, and I'll be answering by the chat also, or you can go to Instagram, follow me, send me a direct message, or sometimes answer to a story that I'm sharing, asking you to ask questions, and I'll just answer everyone. And here is the starter track, which are some initial recommended lectures if this is your first time here, to get you started and up to speed into professional independent game development, right? And this is the most important part, where you can basically follow by email, which will only mean that you get like one email a week, usually with the link for that week's lecture, right? So just so that I have a way to send you the link every Sunday when the lecture goes live, all right? So we need to make that plug, and I had, talking about customer facing websites, this is one example, right? So that's optimized for you to watch. And in the case of Super Mario that I was talking, it's optimized for potential Super Mario customers, that is, people who play Super Mario games, and kids, and those kids' parents, right? So it's optimized for them. And your website, if you're making RPGs for a living, or hope to be making RPGs for a living, odds are your website is meant for players of that type of game, or hopefully it should be using player-centric language, right? So, I won't get into that, but you need to have at least one page that's meant for companies, right? Because companies care about things that are different, right? So what they want to make sure you are reliable, right? That you not just take their money and vanish, that you have done stuff in the past, so that you have some sort of reputation. So if you show that you are well known to some degree, you have participated in some sort of event, you have won some type of award, anything that gives hints that you can be trusted, it's a good idea to have on this page. It's probably more business, meant to sound more approachable to businesses, right? This page, so it's written in a way where it's not talking to the customer, it's talking, the basic message is, hey, we make games for end customers, but we also make games for hire, and we are really good at that. Here are some examples of games that we have developed, no matter if those were B2B or not. And we have like a very specific model. So if your company needs to have a game developed for your advertisement campaign, for your startup, or whatever it is, talk to us to get a quote on your game, right? And then have some sort of link that allows them to send you an email or something like that, or maybe your email address for that type of inquiry, and then they can go there and ask you questions, right? But you need to have some sort of page that you can direct customers to, right? So this is prerequisites. This is something that you need to do just to get started. And also, because I promised it, just some very quick tips on how to develop a portfolio. So you need to finish a few games, even if really small. Some of them need to be well polished. Ideally, they will showcase different art styles. If this sounds scary because you don't know how to make something in a different style than pixel art, for example, I recommend you go here to prointhedev.com/guide and watch lecture number 2, right? This one, which at least as I'm recording this, is still available in the channel. Okay, but you can learn to make something that looks good. I will actually make some lecture for non-artists teaching in detail how you can make your games look better, right? Either pixel art or vector art. There are all sorts of interesting styles that you can develop even if you're not an artist. And there are also ways to hire people to help you just do a paint over on your game and make it look good, right? But showcase some flexibility. Showcase some flexibility. So different art styles, gameplay styles, because odds are if you can showcase more different styles of things and they are all polished enough, they will feel confident that you can develop something that will make sense for their brand or for their specific need, right? And here is a very old use the old advertiser portfolio building technique, right? The ancient. This is a 1,000 years old technique that you need to master, right? So let's make it sound really important by using capitalized letters. What is the oldest trick in the book that you were taught as a professional advertiser? And I'm a if this is your first time here, maybe you don't know that, but I have a degree in an education in marketing, have done that professionally for many years. So technically I am an advertiser, and I can tell one of the things that they teach you when you're looking for a job in an advertising company is that you build a portfolio of your best looking or of your most interesting work following a very specific algorithm. So I'll teach you now because this can help you decide how to define what you'll be showcasing in your website in terms of your games portfolio. And the whole idea is you make, and I'll be adapting these to games, right? But you make enough games so that at least a few of them are well polished enough. If something looks honestly really crappy, you don't even want to be showing that, right? If you have nothing else to show, I don't know, do some art, some concept art, but you need to be showing, if you cannot filter what looks good, decent enough, at least well polished enough from what doesn't, your customer will not be feeling very confident that you'll be able to do a good job for them, right? So you need to be able to filter that. So you need to have some. Let's imagine that you have, for example, 10 different games that you have finished in game jams, maybe some tech demos of games that you have not finished. I have done that as well. And then you can transform that into a tech demo, and you get that, and you have like 5 that are really well polished. You make the first one, you order them from those that are the best. You get, okay, let's make this more visual because I'm feeling like I'm having some trouble explaining. So you have, these are like the grades of the game. So we have one that's really crappy, it's 1 out of 10, one that's 2, one that's 5, one that's, I don't know, 8, one that's 6, another 8, a 10, a 4, a 7, right? So this is how attractive you think these games that you have developed in the past will look for your customer. So the first thing that you do is you just remove anything that's below a certain threshold, right? So if something looks really bad, you don't want to be showing that at all, right? So you're just reducing your portfolio. So you're not showing all your games to publishers, you'll not be showing all your games to potential investors, and you will not be showing all your games to potential B2B customers, all right, which are companies. Instead, what you're going to do is you're going to only have the best looking ones, the most attractive ones, and then you start ordering them in a different order than this. So what you do is you start with the 10 or with the best looking one, the most attractive, most interesting one. Then you go like in growing order, right? So in this case, it would be 5, then 6, and remove the 6 here. Then you have your 7, and then your 2 8s, right? So you cause a really good impression first, and then you reduce the level of energy, but they have seen something that's impressive enough, they find it cool, they giggle, they imagine how their game will be if you develop it for them. Then you show something that's still kind of good, not your best work, but it's still interesting and different, and then it rises and rises and rises, right? So this can be represented like in the sequence of games in a page, for example, where people can click to learn more, or a sequence of screenshots, or if you have a reel, like a show reel, which is like you showing your game like in a trailer, for example, then you probably position your game in that order. And I'm going to show the reel that has helped us make quite some money in the B2B markets, and it is this one. So I have already talked about this reel in the past, and this is one of the main purposes why it was developed. You can see it only has really old games in an old account, but it was still helpful for us, right? So we started with something that's visually impressive for customers who don't really understand. As an expert, I can look at a game like this and know that this is not actually a game, but only a tech demo, right? I have the eye to notice that. But I know it's interesting to show something that's high resolution, that looks like something that they recognize. If they're not gamers themselves, they will understand this type of style. So it's the best looking thing that I had, right? So I made sure that the first scenes were here. Then I'm showing something, the different camera perspective, and showing some gameplay. I know it's not the best looking game we have. Then another different style, something that we have developed a long time ago. This is a game jam game that has earned some, it was ranked really well within that competition. This is one game that I'll be showing today. And I'm just showing lots of different styles and making, even the edition is showing better and better and better looking stuff up until the end, right? So this is one very old trick on how you structure your portfolio. So just follow the ancient advertiser portfolio building technique, and you have something really attractive. And then you come here and put that into your business facing page in your website. And this is basically the prerequisites, right? So you need to put that structure together. So how do you get clients? And I think this is the big question, right? So this all looks good. You're going to make a lot of money and you're being paid to learn, because if you think of it, you are basically working on your skills, you are getting better, you are accumulating mileage as a game developer while being paid to do that, right? So it's all good. Maybe it's helping you grow a business, helping you hire an artist for your own B2C game, and that money is coming from there, right? So it's all good. But how do we make that a reality? And we need someone who wants to give us money in order for that to happen, right? So I think this is the big question. How do you get some clients? So I'll give you some practical steps. The first thing is put together a list of potential companies, right? So I'll be talking broadly about this. I'm not getting into a lot of details because we do have some ground to cover. We are all right. I'm just checking how long it's been so far. So we are good. So put together a list of potential companies. So that can be, for example, advertising agencies, companies, maybe like startups where someone, maybe you know, or maybe some contacts know someone in that startup, for example, because it's working there. I don't know. You don't necessarily need to have a contact. It's just that it's already a bridge, so it makes it a little bit easier. But all sorts of startups. Maybe let's try to brainstorm a bit here, because this is basically what you need to do. And so these are just really examples. So the whole point is brainstorm a bit. Most of my customers have come either from advertising agencies or from startups. Now, it does not necessarily need to be the case, but even if you just stick to this, you are already talking about, lots of different companies. Now, you need to do some research, right? do some research. Maybe companies in your city or in your country, because you speak their language, right? Maybe there are no big providers or cheap enough providers. I don't know, people in universities, for example, sometimes they have some sort of incubator that will work with several startups, and they are starting, so the teachers will know lots of people who are starting their own companies, if it's a business school or if it has some sort of internal incubator. So, the point is, you have to think a little bit and come up with a list of all potential companies that could be interested in you offering that service to them, right? And this is basically cold calling, right? So we could just go and find the top, I don't know, 200 advertising agencies. I don't know, just Google it up and go there and try to find their contacts, right? So advertising agency, I don't know, I'm literally doing this in real time just to see what will show up, right? Top ad agencies and marketing companies. I don't know, what is gut agency? Advertising agencies, top 100 advertising and marketing agencies. So all of those people, they are potentially people who would be interested in or could be interested in having a supplier for games in case they need a game for their marketing campaign, right? So just explore, I don't know, contacts. Where is it? We have like a few emails right here, right? So I don't know, press, jobs, newbies, press, I don't know, this is Buenos Aires, this is Miami. I think I would go with contact, probably. You can just come here and open one by one and try and find, literally dozens or hundreds of potential contacts and put together a list, right? So this is the first thing. Do some research, do some Googling, do some, put all information, organize it on a spreadsheet, and this is how you come up with a cold calling list, right? So it's basically cold calling. So what it means is you don't necessarily need to know people, you don't necessarily need to have a past experience with that company at all. Usually I would prioritize getting started with any type of company that could potentially need that type of service and where I know someone, right? So probably if it's like a huge company, it's unlikely. If you are a really indie guy, it's not an established studio, it's unlikely that they will hire you. But if it's a smaller company, very often, you'll be able to offer this service for them for a price that's affordable, right? So you can be competitive in that space. So a huge company is probably not a good idea, but a mid-sized company, a small company, that could work, right? And that's basically it. You need to understand how polished your portfolio looks. If you are really experienced, then you can make something that will really stand out, and you can go for the top advertising agencies, the top I don't know, companies. If you're just starting out, start approaching smaller companies, but this is basically it. And many sales in the world, they are done like this: cold calling, right? You just come up with something interesting, you show them the material, you come up with this list of people to approach, and you approach one by one, right? You just mass email them. I'm not telling you to spam, I'm telling you to send a professional introduction letter to them, showing your portfolio and telling them that you do this service. If they want, they can ask you to not bother them again, but probably they will just be interested in browsing and seeing if you are indeed a potential supplier, in case they need that service. In case they don't, at some point maybe they do, so they can keep your contact there and reach out to you later, right? You never know, but this is kind of like fishing, right? So let's get back to the steps here. So number 2, put together an introduction letter, which is just a pretty name for a well-written email. That introduces yourself, that explains the service you are offering, making games for hire, basically making games for them for a price, making custom games for them for a price, and how they can contact you if they need that service, and a sample of your portfolio, right? So this is the first thing, and then you basically send that. Let me see. And then you basically send that to people, right? So you come up with a list of potential, a list of contacts of potentially interested companies, and then you write one really well written email that talks about you very shortly, very to the point, explain the service that you offer. It's so a practical example could be, hello, dear, I don't know, Mr. Sullivan. My name is Gabriel. I'm the owner of a game development studio called Pixel Cows, and we develop games. We develop custom games as a service. So if your company needs a game, you can ask them. You can ask us, and we'll give you a proposal of how we could make that game for you, how much it would cost, and we have worked with this, and that companies in the past, and this is a sample of our work. So if this is interesting for you, if you are needing a game right now, or if you need at some point in the future, I would really appreciate if you remembered us and considered us, and reached out to us to give you a proposition of how we can handle your project, right? So sincerely, Gabriel. That's an example of a decent, it's nothing more than that. And then I would put an attachment to maybe some of my best looking games, and I would also have a link to the website that I have built meant for companies to look at, the thing that we mentioned in the prerequisites, right? That's basically it. I will not write this down because it will take too long. If you want, just go back and write it down. But this is basically the structure. It's very simple. Just introduce yourself, explain the service, why you are reaching out to them, show what you have done in the past, tell what they need to do if they want to hire your service, and that's basically it. And then make sure to include your portfolio and the link to your website. All right, so that's basically that, what you need to do. Also, explore your network. So I have already talked about that. When you are thinking about companies that you know someone, this is one way, but also there are other aspects. Just letting people know, everyone you know. Is that how you write this? Letting everyone you know that you develop games professionally, right? Because you will never know where the opportunities will come from. In practice, and this has happened to me a lot, you don't know which of your contacts will actually show up one day and say, hey, Gabriel, actually you make games. And you make games. I know that you make games. This is a really interesting profession. And I happen to have a project where we are considering, I don't know, maybe I'm giving consultation to a company and they are considering having a game, or maybe I'm working in an advertising agency, or I know someone who was asking and considering making an advertisement game, and I remembered you. Now, the reason why people would remember you is because they know that you make games, right? Otherwise, there won't be a match. So if people know that you make games, and then that you also are considering the possibility of making, games for other businesses, then they might remember you, right? So just explore your network, reach out to people who might be interested in particular, but also make sure to let everyone know, because you never know where those opportunities will come from, right? And if you do everything right, eventually you will be approached to make a proposition for some projects. So that is basically you proposing one specific way of delivering a game that someone needs, right? So this is basically like fishing, right? So if you are never, let me write this down. If you never throw any hooks, you will never get any fishes. Okay, so this is a bit of a statistical game, honestly, right? So you can do all that and even then not have anything happening, nobody approaching you for 6 months. It's possible, right? So what I would recommend, if you are considering the possibility, and I want you to envision this. Probably making games for hire is not the reason why you became a game developer, right? Let's be really honest here. That's not the reason why most people started making games or wanted to make games for a living, right? Because you want to make a game that really inspires you. You probably have like this big game in your head that you want to create one day. Now, for the practicalities of making that happen, you having the time to put into your game development, you having access to talents, you've been able to travel to conferences, to network, you've been able to doing all sorts of investments. It might be useful to have some real money coming in, right? And that's how you can couple your own game development, like your B2C big project or smaller projects, hopefully, for being following the FGGS framework that I teach. You will be making several games and growing those games in scope, but also if something appears out of this B2B effort, you can stop for maybe a couple months, develop that game for that customer, make some money, and then go back to your project. All right? So this is important. Don't get distracted. If you never throw any hooks, you never get any fishes, right? This is important to understand. So some ways where I have managed to get customers in the past. Basically, everyone I know knows that I make games. I'm the game development guy in my social circle, right? Everybody knows. Everybody thinks of me. Usually first, me or my business partner, who's my cousin, they usually think of us when they think game development, right? So someone really likes a game, they'll think, oh, you know what? Gabriel and JP, they develop games. They all, it's automatic. They always know that because, that's an unusual profession. So just letting them know will probably have them memorizing that information, So everyone I know knows that I work with games and that I develop games professionally for, I don't know, over a decade now. Yes, if you consider the time before I left IBM, but I was already starting to try. That's been more than a decade that I have been developing games professionally, and people know that. So at some point, people just recommend me for something. I gave a talk on Global Game Jam, I think in 2013 or so. I gave talks in local game events. My partner has given talks and roundtables on his university talking about business, about entrepreneurship, about game development. And so we are out there. We are basically being seen by some people, right? And I have had prospects, which means, potential customers reaching out to me, coming from people who saw some of my talks or from someone who heard that I made games and someone I knew remembered me or something like that. We have one game that came up, one customer that came up because someone I knew took advantage of the fact that they knew me to include an advert game on an advertising campaign, right? So they didn't want necessarily to have an advert game, but because the guy remembered that I made games, they decided it would be really cool if their project also had an advert game. And that's how they added an advert game to the scope of the project before I even got involved, right? So he reached out to me and said, hey, we remembered you. Maybe we thought it could be a good idea. I don't know, convince us that it would be a good idea to give you money to make a game for us. And so I did that, and we closed the deal, and we developed the game, right? So I had one friend who worked on an advertising agency. He was not an advertiser before that, but you never know where your friends will end up in life, and so this can happen. Another reason for you to network a little bit and to let people know that you do this. My business partner had a teacher who was giving mentoring to a group of entrepreneurs, and this group ended up needing someone to develop a game for their business to make sense, because part of their business was games, but they didn't have anyone who was a professional game developer in the team. So that teacher remembered my business partner, and they ended up hiring our company to develop those games, and we made a good deal of money with that company, right? So you never know where it will come up, but we know that if you never throw any hooks, nothing will ever happen, right? So if you are the guy that makes game for everyone you know, if you have a decent professional presence, like you have a web page, if you take advantage of the opportunities for showing up, for appearing in front of a lot of people, or even try to dig those opportunities, it's a matter of time until some opportunities start to show up for you, right? So if this is something that you find interesting, if you are considering the possibility of making B2B games as a potential source of money for you and your game studio, then my recommendation would be, in practice, put together your infrastructure, right? So the website, the portfolio, and all that. And then you work on your game. And every once in a while, so just to be clear, I'm talking about your B2C game, probably the big game, the really good one, the thing that you want to develop, or the thing that you think is smart to develop as per the FGJS framework. All right, for new people here, FGJS stands for finishing good games that sell, right? So I'm not advertising it. I'm not, this is not marketing, because you cannot even get into this training. It's not open right now, but it's the name of my advanced training, right? It's called FGJS. Now, the whole development methodology that I have been teaching throughout these several lectures is part of FGJS, right? So this is what I mean when I'm mentioning it. So hopefully you are developing a game that's optimized, that makes sense for you according to the moment where you are in your own growth as a game developer. So you are working on a game that makes sense for you, and every once in a while, maybe every few months, you can send one email to this list that you put together, just showing something cool you made, right? Just to remind them that you exist and perform this service. If at any point they ask you to stop emailing them, you immediately stop emailing them, right? But usually, if you are finding the right contacts, or if you are following up with the people who do respond to you, you find what is the appropriate email for people who are actually professionals at buying these types of services, right? So you are probably talking to people who actually care, ideally, right? So I'm not telling you to spam anyone, to send emails to random emails that will not work, and that's unethical. What I'm telling you is, try to go into those websites and find the contact and ask, hey, what is your business contact, or maybe your supplier contact, because I'm a game development agency and I make advert games, and I think your agency might be interested in my portfolio. And then they will give you an email of someone. Then you replace the email for the correct one, and then you send your presentation letter to that email, right? So if you're doing this in an ethical way, in an organized way, then they will probably like receiving your emails. And if they don't, you will just immediately stop sending them. You can maybe organize that through a newsletter, so that there's an unsubscribe button at the end or something like that. Always be ethical about anything you do, right? Follow the rules. I will not be getting into that. Okay, but you can search that up and see what's an ethical way of doing that. But once you have an ethical way of emailing people, you can do that every several months. Send one email, don't be a pain in the ass, but just for them to remember that you exist and that you supply that service, because you never know when they will be needing, right? So if you do this every 6 months, for example, that's probably a good range for you to get started. And sometimes you will be working on your own game. Sometimes you will be working on a B2B project and getting paid for that, right? So at some point things just start appearing, and that's basically how it works, right? So one specific question that one of my followers asked is, do you need to have a template game so that you can just like change the sprites to customize the game for the brands that's hiring you? And I would say not necessarily. Probably you can develop a game. There's several ways of approaching that, but I don't think it's a good idea for you to proactively spend a lot of time creating templates, so that maybe when you sell that game to some company, it's easier to develop, right? Because in the end, you'll be putting more work ahead of time, even before you know if you are getting hired or not, right? So you can, for example, make one game for someone, and then for the next customer, you offer a version that's a little bit cheaper, where it's basically just a rebranding of that game. That's one way of going about that, right? But you don't need to proactively build lots of game templates. Probably not going to generate a lot of high quality ones if you approach it that way. It's possible. There are companies that do that in that model. It's fine. But in practice, for people who are following this, I don't think that's a good idea to spend a lot of time putting like this huge portfolio of template games. Work on your games, work on game jam games, on stuff for casual portals, on stuff for itch.io. I don't know, work on your game. Maybe have an RSC strategy if you are in FGJS, where you have this engine and you are constantly shipping games based on that engine. And then at some point you can offer that, something like that, like a version of your engine, like a very small portion of the game that you are developing, customize it in a very specific way to attend the needs of one particular customer, right? So I think that it's a little bit better. Or you do that, either do that or you start from scratch. Usually that would be my recommendation, right? And even before following blindly any advice that I give, I want to understand the reasoning, right? And the reason for that is you want to avoid doing a lot of work before you even know if people will buy that or not, right? So the whole point is try to, do the best thing that you can, but only the necessary things, right? So high quality stuff, but only the needed stuff. That's the ideal way to approach that. Okay, so with that, we have talked about how to get customers. We have talked about the prerequisites. So I want to show you what some of these games can actually look like in real life, right? So let me give you some context here. I'm going to show you very quickly 3 different games that I have developed under this particular B2B model, right? So those were real games that were sold and made real money for my company, and these are close to the final versions that were shipped. I think in all of these games the final version was web, and I don't have like an exactable version that I can easily show, but I have like the Windows version of something that was close to what was effectively shipped. So the final version of those games. All right. So the first one was a game the game was basically meant to promote a learning platform. So let me move to full screen for just a minute. So they had this learning platform meant for people who, basically were deciding what, you are a young person and you are seeking a profession, and the government actually had this platform with lots of free courses for you to learn programming on different languages, for you to learn English, maybe the Office package or something like that. And so they had all this free training, and they wanted to advertise that so that more people would know that this thing existed. They hired an advertising agency to do the overall campaign, and one person that know me remembered me and thought that it was a good idea to have an advert game as part of that campaign. So he reached out to me, and we thought together how we could make that happen. Now the thing is, usually when people start, people who are not game developers, they start imagining having some sort of game for their brand, for their campaign, for their work. They get really excited, right? Because this is not where they operate. It's kind of magical for them to have something interactive with their brand, with their logo, with their characters, with their ideas. It's kind of magic. We are professionals, or we are hopefully becoming professionals here, and so this is a little bit more obvious to us, but they will usually be really excited about the possibilities, right? And they will have ideas of their own. So what happens is that as a professional, you need to be able to advise your customers so that you basically have to find a balance between including enough of their ideas in the game so that they feel that what they're being, they are participating in the process, but also you as the professional, you have the responsibility of making sure that the game works for what they want, right? So this is important to understand. You are the professional. They are hiring you to develop the game. So if the game doesn't work as a game because the design is actually crappy, because something was a bad idea, it's your fault usually, right? Because you can either develop blindly and knowing that it will not work and it will be a problem in your hands, or you can inform them and explain to them why you find some aspect of their idea really exciting and how you can actually make that happen with some adjustments so that it works, based on all the knowledge that you as a professional have, right? So it's a fine balancing act, right? So in this case, this is what happened. The customer got to us with some very specific ideas. I understood that what they wanted in the end was to show the importance of you getting professional technical education to basically enable you to more professions or to become a more important member of any team, right? So this was the briefing, and they had like this complex idea for a management game where you would be able to decide in which project you would be working on. You would put together a team. You would manage the work, the day-to-day work, and then also at some point your employees would be able to learn stuff from that platform that they wanted to promote. And when they presented that to me, I was like, okay, that's awesome, that's a great idea, let's make that happen. And it was fine, but deep down I knew that the scope was way too big and probably we wouldn't be able to make something really good with the time that we had, right? With the amount of resources that they were willing to pay, right? It was a well-paid project, but we would work on that thing for like 2 to 3 months, but not more than that, because otherwise it wouldn't be profitable for my company, right? So this is the briefing that we got. In the end, what we did was we simplified the project. We replaced mechanics by content because it was easier to develop. We added some context through text, and we made a smaller management game that was more casual, that was more adequate to the audience, because we as professionals knew that most people browsing the platform wouldn't get into SimCity, right? They wanted something easier to interact, otherwise they would just close if they needed to learn too much. So it needed to be easy to learn and also have a very well integrated tutorial, right? So I'm going to open the game and I'm going to show my screen in a second. And I'm going to put it in windowed mode so that you guys can see it without me covering part of it. So, okay, and this is in Portuguese because this was meant for the Brazilian market. You don't need to understand anything that's written here. But as you obviously noticed, this was based on Star Wars, and that's one way that we found to make it interesting and intriguing. If you have been following, you have heard of the 5:30 close rule. This is one hook that we threw in right in the beginning to make sure that people would be playing for at least a few minutes to understand what the hell a IT training platform has to do with Star Wars, right? So this is part of the thing that we were doing. And the context here is that you are starting your own company. So this is the dream that we are selling to people who are browsing the platform. You are opening your own company. Actually, do I have the audio going on? I hopefully don't. And this is clipping a little bit on the side because this is actually a HTML5 game. So in the window where it would show, it would not clip. Here's the Windows version, so it's clipping, but it's not a problem because the final version was not like that. So this is your secretary introducing herself to you, and she is explaining to you that you need to fill some paperwork to get started. So here you have the opportunity of writing your company name, right? So Pro Indie Dev, for example, but the person playing would write, I don't know, John Incorporated, for example. And then it will have that into the wall, right? And that was a nice little touch that we added that got people in the agency really excited because they felt like it was their game, and every customer felt it was their game. And then there's like this little story going on where the character is a little bit panicked about starting the next day managing his own company. And this is the basic interface of the game, right? So this is all tutorial. It's the first project. It will issue a little bit of money, and then you click on start project. I'm just passing the text because it's not super important that you understand the entire design, but it's like some funny, interesting text. And then you hire your first employee, and here he is, right? And so all these tables, they represent tasks that you need to complete in order to finish your project. And what you do in this game is basically just pulling your employees and allocate them to one of the tasks, right? So just drop them and they will start working, and you can see that the work is being done because this pile of paper here starts diminishing, and when it zeros, it basically means the task is completed, right? And then it will unlock this green line here, indicates that this task is already available. This one is also here, but it cannot be done because it's still locked. So just allocate Jaime to work on this thing, and he works kind of slowly, so he's not super good in this task that is written right here, so he takes a lot of time to do that, right? So he happens to be an expert in the next task, so when I drag him here, he is super quick, right? So this was basically the point of the game. Okay, tutorial text that I'm skipping because I'm explaining it, it's more fun. So this is another Java task, so he's really good, so he's really fast with that. And now here is a slightly bigger task, and I put him to work, and oh boy, he takes a long time to do that because it's a big work and he's not an expert in remote networking, which is the task at hand. However, at some point he gets enough experience where he gets to choose, you get to choose as the manager, someone to level up. In this case, we only have this guy, and when we do that, he'll become a good professional in external networking. So I click on him. Now he is really good with that as well, and so he can also finish this type of task really quickly, right? Then you finish the project and you make some money and you go to the next level, right? And this will rinse and repeat, and it will also evolve a little bit. Now you can see your first employee and you dreaming together about the future of the company, and there are some silly jokes about the boss feeling that it is like literal hell, but it actually uses the word literally wrong, and so the employee is making a joke about that. And then, it's basically just a silly text that moves the story a little bit and creates some empathy with the characters that you have hired. And now for the next level, you have a bigger project. It's a little bit more complex, and so you have to hire someone else, right? So I'll hire Ingrid. And now we have 2 employees, and the tasks will start unlocking. And I'm showing how this game works because I want you to understand how it's your responsibility to make sure that whatever it is that the person who hired you to do asked, it's your responsibility as a professional game developer and game designer to make sure that you are achieving their goals, right? So what we're doing here is basically showing that when you get to learn, when you do a training, a professional training into some sort of skill, you get so much more effective in doing that. So look at how they both working together take a long time to finish this thing, right? And they cannot work on anything else. However, this task here is English, which is Ingrid's specialty, and this is Java, which is Jaime's specialty, right? So this is just to show how it's important to learn stuff. Oh my god, the tutorial sounds really big. And they can do complex tasks really quickly when they are specialized in that. When they are not, it takes a lot of time. And look at the size of this task here. It would take probably 5 minutes to get done if you don't have enough knowledge to handle math, which is basically the training that we were offering here. Math. This was one of the trainings that this platform offered, and so we made sure to align with that, right? So we leveled up. We can pick either one of them, and I will pick Ingrid because she will actually get a specialty in math, and this is what will really help us. So I'll just move her here, and now she can get this done really, really quickly comparatively, right? And so as you go, you'll be unlocking more characters in every there's I think 5 levels and 5 projects. It starts getting more and more complex, and you have the opportunity to level up your characters, and basically by getting them to practice and to go to the platform that hired us and taking some training in some specialized subject, you get more and more effective at playing the game. And so this gives you the message that by going to the platform and learning, you are becoming a better professional, you're becoming more effective in whatever it is that you do, right? So this is one practical example. Another game that we developed, this was really interesting, and I promised that I will talk briefly about it, but it was a company, it's a medtech slash, I think it's called actually a medtech because it's medical technology that was supposed to help people with some sort of physical impairment, some physical disability, to help them recover their movements, right? So they were very specialized in that. They worked with physiotherapists that received these people who needed this sort of treatment, into their doctor offices, and they would understand which were the difficulties of these professionals and of the people going through these therapies. And one of them, basically 2 main ones were pointed to us when we got hired to develop those games. One was that usually the therapy is not super fun for the patient, so having to do the same movement 1,000 times is kind of boring, and also it's difficult to measure their progress. So what this medtech did was they wanted to offer a portfolio of games that they could doctors in that specialty could use, and those games were basically ways for having the patients to go through treatment by doing movements in front of a computer, right? So we had to develop a technology that would use the webcam to detect where the hands of the patients were, and they could do stuff like this, just trying to touch stuff on the screen without actually having to touch because the webcam is detecting. And that's how they basically issued commands to the game, right? So you have to click on a button, for example, instead of going with the mouse and clicking on that, you would instead reach out for that button. Now, I would very much like to show that technology for you guys because it's interesting. It's kind of like Kinect, but working with any webcam. But I didn't want to lose a lot of time, learning how to make my webcam work in tandem with OBS, which is what I'm using to record. So instead, I'm going with controlling this thing with a mouse, right? So the first one, and for that, I think I can turn on the sound. The first one is a game called Me Move, and it is basically genius. The game about clicking on, or actually about pushing buttons on the correct order, but adapted to that. And one of the reasons why, for the context, and one of the reasons why I'm showing this game is because, I want to show you how simple this can be. It really depends on who your customer is and what they need to do, right? So usually I would choose camera. I'm going with the mouse just for the sake of demonstrating here while I record my screen. Basically, there are 3 levels. You can pick, one of these settings, and it is a very, very simple game, right? So the context here would be the patients would be in the doctor appointments, and they would open this game and they could play for a bit, but instead of clicking, they would be reaching for the buttons on the screen by moving their arms, basically. And it's genius, right? So all you have to do is click on the right order, and then it will include one more command that you have to do, and that's basically what it is, right? And we made sure to include a few levels, not because they are different, because they are not. It's basically the same thing, but because this made it so much more valuable for the customer, and it was so easy for us to do, right? I'm not sure if I paid attention. I did not. But it was very easy for us to just change the graphics. The motion capture technology was already working. The basic game was already there. It was just basically changing graphics. So why not? It was an easy way for us to add a lot of value to the customer, right? And this is something that you need to be thinking always, either in your B2B or in your B2C games. And the final one that I want to show, actually I opened the wrong one. The final one that I want to show is a Guitar Hero version where customers would be going to their medical appointments, but instead of doing some boring exercises, they would be actually playing an adapted version of Guitar Hero, right? So it has, does it have sound? Hopefully you can hear my voice well enough. Let me see how the sound is balanced in OBS. I'm not sure if you're hearing any sound at all. If you are not, I'm sorry, but it's basically a game very similar to Guitar Hero. You just get to pick the level where you want to play, and you get started, and you will be playing to the rhythm of a music in the background by reaching out your arms and touching the notes when they cross this line at the bottom of the screen, right? So it's a very simple game. Once again, the importance of understanding what your customer needs, and what they needed was something that people with physical disabilities could actually win, right? So it was meant to be relatively easy for you to just keep your hands overlapping with the right button, and yes, I mentioned there was two difficulties. One that they had was that it was boring for people to be doing the exercises without this gamification experience that we created, and also measuring their progress, right? So we actually implemented some analytics here so that, you know, the time that people would take to touch the right button, or their hit ratio here, would be measured and recorded. And if a patient attended to the doctor's appointment for maybe a few months in a row to do their physiotherapeutic exercises, they would be able to see the progress in terms of reflex, in terms of their reaction time, in terms of movement, and all that, all through some analytics intelligence that we implemented in the background. This was a very high-paying project. It was really, really good for us. We worked on that from 2017 to start the contract up until some point in 2018. And then they went forward and actually hired 8 other games besides these 2 that I just showed. So that was really cool. And I think they ran out of fund. Actually, they used these 2 games as the centerpiece of their pitch for investors, and they are still seeking investment. As far as I know, last year they were seeking, because there were some limitations in the Brazilian investments for science, basically, unfortunately, because of our great president, who I'm not really a fan of. But yeah, that's what happened. So I just wanted to show some real games, because you can see that, you know, they are relatively simple games, but you can make a lot of money, right? So just to give you a ballpark, and I cannot tell you the exact numbers or the details that we worked on, how we charge the customer. You know, some of this is confidential. Because of them, I would show. But if I was developing a game like this today, I actually did some calculation here, but I would probably be charging, you know, $15,000 to $20,000, probably something in that range. That would be, for each of these games. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, depends. Nowadays, I'm not taking a lot of these projects. We are working on a B2C game, actually 2 games for PlayStation and PC. So we're not taking these types of contracts right now. But just to give you an order of magnitude, like an idea of what you can make, and it can be interesting. Now, you have to know that we already have a reputation. We had the privilege of having clients falling on our laps. We didn't have to seek them out, because we had a reputation and we had a good portfolio. And as you can see, even if those were relatively simple games, comparing to what you would expect to find on Steam, for example, they are well polished. They have juiciness going on, they have animations, they are well done. They are not rough around the edges, right? We made sure to make it a polished project, a polished product for the context that they were meant to be, right? And that's why, because we have a reputation, they can be sure that you have something really good for their brands. And because we have the ability to put something like that together, we get to charge more, right? If you are just starting out, probably you won't be able to be charging this much, and probably the game that you'll be delivering will not be this polished or disaligned with the briefing, but you got to start somewhere, right? So even if you're just charging, I don't know, $2,000, that can be a lot of money to a lot of people, right? Maybe for 2 months of your time or part-time, you're working on your daytime job and also getting to practice and making some extra dollars by working by night on something that's helping you improve as a game developer, getting you real mileage as a professional developer, and making you extra money, and generating your portfolio that will help you get contracts with other customers that will pay you better, that will help you get contracts with publishers because you have more stuff to show. You are creating this whole positioning and this whole credibility background that will help you in every step of the way. So this can be helpful even if you're charging way less than we get to charge nowadays, or that you got to charge a couple years ago. All right. So for a few more practical tips, we talked about you putting together your prerequisites so that you can start being approached, and then you're doing some outreach work to eventually get some clients, right? So if you do this, at some point you will either approach a company or be approached by a company about a specific project, right? So at some point this will happen, right? Either as as a result of your outreach effort, someone will say, actually, hey, I'm needing a game. So what would you do with this specific briefing, right? And then they will explain what they need, and then, or maybe you send those emails and nobody will respond, but then a few months down the line, someone might get back to you and offer you, the possibility of making a proposal for them, right? So proposing a way to handle their project, right? So the first thing that happens is this: you have to put together a proposal, right? So in practice, it's a proposed design and how it helps them reach their goals, right? Here, once again, you have to balance what will be a good idea that will lead to a feasible game that you can finish to a high quality standard and that will have their customers happy, while also incorporating some of their ideas or some of the the general vibe that they want. But you are trying to meet at some point where they feel represented in the project, but they also can trust you as a professional because they see that you understand the thing that you are selling, right? So you're talking as a professional, and so this both helps you propose something that will actually be feasible, that will make sense for you, that will not have you developing a 3 months game over the period of 2 years, because that will not be profitable. This will be feasible, but this will also be something that meets the criteria that they have, right? So you need to try and meet them at some point midway. And here, oops, I'm sorry, I was actually editing my notes. So here you can propose a game made from scratch that's more expensive, or you can propose something that will be easier to develop, usually because it's based on a game that you are already developing, or because it's a rebranding or a reskinning of a game that you have already developed. This will be cheaper because this will be cheaper for them, because you are basically having to work less hours to finish the game, right? So there are pros and cons, right? Obviously, the advantages of making a game from scratch is that this type of game, and all of those that I have shown, they have been made from scratch, right? The advantage will be that it will be a better match for the briefing, right? You can do something that's exactly what they need to provide the message or to have the functionality that they are hiring, right? The main advantage of doing something easier to develop, of course, is cost. So what I usually do and I recommend you do is start with this. This is your leading offer. Also mention this possibility, right? My recommendation is start proposing the perfect game that you have their eyes shining with emotion in imagining what the game will be like, because then you can show something that's a little bit more expensive and it will still make sense for them. But also make sure to mention the possibility of making something that's a little bit less custom, but that can still work and that can still be cool and have a positive, cool message about their brand, or that will do what they need in some way, even if it's less customized, and that will be cheaper. So mention that possibility, because if they cannot pay you the amount that you are asking, you won't lose the deal, right? They can still offer you what you can do with $5,000 instead, or with $1,000 instead, right? It will depend on the type of game and all that. So your proposal, it will include a proposed design. I think I got all the spacing wrong in here. I will not bother too much about it, so I'll just go with this. Also, it includes a proposed methodology, right? So my recommendation here is, you are the experts. That person that you are talking to probably is not a game developer, doesn't really understand the nature of game development. And we developers know that actually game development can be a difficult to tame beast, right? It has lots of creative risks. It has technological risks. If you have been paying attention, you already know the rule of twice, invisible scope, and all those nasty things, right? So usually what happens in the reality of game development is that you have to iterate, right? So no static design, even the one that you are proposing here right now, is likely to work entirely as you are envisioning it right now, right? And their ideas also, right? If they have something very clear in their minds, you can execute that exactly as they requested, and it will lead to a crappy game. Or maybe you try to do that, but you find out that one aspect of their technology actually takes a lot of time to put together, right? So for example, this motion capture technology that they requested us to develop took a lot longer than we wanted, right? And then afterwards, as we made progress through the project, we identified an alternative on how to make that happen that would be virtually identical, but it was not how they asked, right? But there was the risk of us not finding the proper answer, and that would require us to stay a little bit longer developing the technology, and therefore having to take a little bit less time to develop the levels. So maybe we would have to ship those. We would have to ship those games without the extra levels, without all the options of music and all the options of scenarios and all that. We'd have to make that more simple, right? So fortunately, that did not happen, but it was a possibility. And also, the first game that I show about managing the company by dragging the employees, that was not the original design, right? It was not. We started with something that was similar to that was more similar to what the customer explicitly requested. And as we started developing, we identified that some things were more fun than others, and we basically invested on the things that would make the game better, right? So for that, you need to propose a methodology that takes that into account, right? You are the professional game developer in the relationship, so you are responsible for explaining that to them, right? So my recommendation is commit to the method, not the exact deliverable, right? Because people writing contracts, they will often want something like this. So the final game will have 3 levels, 5 characters, 2 racing power ups, and this can be fine. If this is a game that you can envision, that will make sense, and there's low risk, you can commit to that. My recommendation is avoid this if you can. Instead, go with something more like, this will be a project, and once again, I will not be taking note on that, so pay attention. This will be a project that will be developed over the course of 3 months. We are expecting to have the alpha version, the first prototype built in 20 days after the signature of the contract. So that's a very common way of phrasing that. So after 20 days, there will be a first prototype. We will send it to the customer. You have the opportunity to give feedback, and we will prioritize and execute. We will negotiate over email and tell what's possible, what's not within the time range that we have, and then we incorporate the adjusted design and have an alpha version in 7 weeks from the signature of the contract. We'll send another version for you. You have the opportunity to validate, sign off, and then we'll move on to develop the levels, for example. And you are basically committing to dates and to what you'll be doing and to a certain degree of communication with them, right? But not the exact deliverables, because in the end, maybe it's better if the game actually only have one game, but actually has, I don't know, 20 power-ups, because you find out that making new levels takes a lot of time, so it will be really silly and simple, but power-ups are very easy to develop, and they add a lot to the fun and to the message of your advert game, for example. So if that's the case, you can just talk to the client and get their approval by email to make that adjustment. If you're being open and transparent and proactive in your communication, if you're keeping your customer in the loop, odds are they want the same thing that you want, which is to meet the deadline, but also make the best possible game with the budget that they have, right? So by keeping an open line and negotiating and keeping them involved and explaining the rationale behind your decision making, odds are you have them at your side, right? Sometimes they will give you feedback that you need to take into account, that will require you to work a little bit more and make some adjustments. But overall, I would recommend committing to the method instead of the exact deliverable, right? So this is one thing that I wanted to talk about proposed methodology. All right, what else is part of your proposal? Your price, of course, right? So some very quick tips is here are, calculate your costs, right? So maybe if to pay the rent, you take like $1,000 a month to pay the rent and buy food and all that, it's $1,000 a month. And the game will take about 3 months to be completed. The very first number that you have is $3,000. Then you add some, some margin in case something gets delayed. Maybe you add some prices for buying assets that you might need, maybe hiring someone to, I don't know, buying from a website the music that you need for the game. Whatever it is, you need to add that and then add some margin, and that's usually the cost that you have. Now, this is not necessarily how much your game is worth, right? So one thing is the cost. To develop something. Another thing is how much it is worth, right? So nowadays, because I'm well known, I have a reputation, I can easily get someone to recommend me, someone famous to recommend me, for example. I could charge more than this. And this is not because of my life cost. This is because, all the safety that comes with you hiring me. So customers also end up paying for that. And I'm not saying this to brag, by all means. What I want you to understand is that cost is different from what people might be willing to pay for your work. And in the end, it's up to you to decide. So I think the easiest maybe proxy to calculate your price, I would recommend you do all this effort. Think of in terms of cost, in terms of how much it's worth. But in the end, I think the final decision maker calculation should be this one. How much you must charge for you to be happily working on this game for the time it will take to be 100% finished and delivered, right? So this is the most important question that you must ask yourself, right? It's important to anchor that in reality so that you have some broad numbers to understand at least where you are. But in the end, this is what you need to understand. if you find yourself charging so little that you are unhappy because you're not feeling like you're being paid well enough to develop that game, unless you absolutely need to work on that, probably it's not a good idea, right? So you don't want to offer a price just to close the deal and then be unhappy for several months, or maybe, I don't know, even longer, depending on how long the contract is, right? So we don't want to do that. Find out what is the amount of money that will make you be excited about it, because you are not working on your game or your main game, you are basically working on someone else's stuff, and so it must be worth it, right? That's why you might end up charging a little bit more, right? And then you have to, of course, balance you being happy and this being worthy for you versus your probability of getting the contract, right? Because you might be competing with other people as well. But so these are some things to take into account. Besides your proposed price, always include is that how you write it? Is it clause or clausule? I think it's clause, so I'll keep it clause. It's basically a phrase or a part of your contract that covers, include a clause about scope increases, right? So as I recommended, you'll be committing more to the method than to the exact deliverable. You'll be talking about the general deliverable, and you'll be talking about the goal of that development effort that the customer is buying. But in the end, you are leaving some flexibility to how that will work out during the development process, right? And there is some adjustments that are just part of you delivering that. You're making adjustments as part of what they hired. However, imagine that you deliver your prototype, for example, or you deliver your alpha build, and they had approved that the prototype was about something, and then the alpha build is basically that same thing but more developed, and then they figure out they actually wanted a lot more features. How do you handle that? Because this, and they might not even know that they are being unreasonable. They don't understand how long it takes to develop stuff, right? So I always like to be upfront about those things. So what I usually do, and I recommend this is a way to approach that, is include a clause about scope increases, and that can be basically something like if there's a need to increase the development effort during the project due to newly, I don't know, maybe due to extra content or functionality that was not in the approved deliverables, the previous approved deliverables, we will be happy to include those for X, I don't know, X dollars per week, extra week of development. So the idea here is not you treating your customer as an enemy, right? Like, hey, we will not increase the scope, and if you want, you have to pay for that. That's a very negative way of handling the relationship with someone who is on the same team as you. So that's not how you want to approach that. Instead, what you want to do is say, hey, we are super excited about this project and we want it to thrive. And of course, there will be limitations regarding how much effort we can put into this as per this contract. However, if at any point the customer feels a need to increase the scope over what has been hired, we will be happy to do that work, right? We'll be happy to do that work. We want to do that work and make this game as good as possible. And in order to make that possible, we have a working rate of X dollars per extra week of development, right? So this is you being your customer's friend, right? You are both in the same team and you're just telling how it works because they can't know that, right? So you need to, they won't know that they are being unreasonable. So it's your job as a professional to make sure that you are being upfront and nice about those things, okay? Last thing about proposal is always open with a short, impactful pitch about you slash your company. And always add your portfolio at the end of the proposal. I doubt it will be able to fix that at the end of the proposal. So why is that? It's because you are basically, you are starting with a proposed design, you are selling that design, you are speaking about how cool it will be, about how it will work exactly to what they need, and then how it will be really easy and nice to work with you because you are organized and flexible and committed to that customer's success. And then you talk about the price, right? And then this is the punch for them. This is okay, so all right, I have to pay for that, so is it worth it? When you close with your portfolio, you are basically giving them another mechanism to imagine the game, because they're looking at screenshots. And when I say portfolio at the end of the proposal, I'm basically talking about including screenshots, like the best looking screenshots, following that ancient advertiser portfolio thing I taught before, right? So they will finish reading and then they'll just browse, naturally keep reading the next pages, and be reminded about the, being able to visualize what their game will be like when it's finished, right? So it just helps them understand and visualize what they'll be paying for. So it's a good idea, and it will make it easier for you to close the deal. Okay? So proposal, that's what we had about proposal. Now, this will be really simple. Contract. How do you handle the contract? And, it's important for you to understand that it's basically just a formal version of the proposal. So if you made one, you made 80% of the work of doing the other, probably, right? Now, I cannot give you any sort of legal advice because I have people following this initiative from, I don't know, over 100 different countries probably, and in every one of those countries, laws will be different. I cannot, offer any sort of advice in that. So looking a little bit from afar, just to give you some general guidance on this, usually what is the general workflow to get a proposal, like a text, like a contract text that both of you will sign and start working on the thing? Sometimes they will send you a proposed text, then you just read that and think if this is covering everything that's necessary. What do I mean? Your price, your scope increase clause, your proposed methodology, the general scope that you are agreeing to, maybe some references. It's putting all there so that you are not bound to something that you cannot deliver afterwards, right? Or that will keep you in a bad situation. You have to think of those things up front. So it's a formal version of the proposal. Sometimes they will send you that proposed text and you just have to review to make sure that it's including everything that's necessary. Other times, they will just ask you to send some text, and they will review that. They will circulate that in the company, maybe show to their lawyer, who might add stuff or remove stuff or talk to you about stuff, and then you make some changes. The text will get back to you. You will make some adjustments and give it back to them. When you are both happy with the text, you proceed to signing it, right? So if you never signed a contract before, this is usually how it goes, right? Remember that contracts are meant to protect both parties when things go wrong, right? So remember that the moment of drafting the contract is friendly. You want to make this happen. They like it, your proposal. They want to make this happen. It's good for everyone because you have made a good proposal for them, right? This is a prerequisite. Everyone is friends here at this moment. It is a friendly moment. So in a friendly way, it's your responsibility and their responsibility right now to anticipate failure scenarios or extreme cases where things might go wrong, and make sure that you are covering those situations, right? So I have talked a bit about that, so I just want you to keep this in mind. But people generally want things to work. They want the contract to be signed. They want it, by now you have usually already made the sale. They already decided that they will give you the money, and you already decided that you work on the game. So it's basically just making it formal, right? So my advice is be diligent, but be friendly. Be diligent, but also friendly, right? So you must be responsible, make sure to include everything, cover the situations well, but be friendly and nice and positive while you do that. And as I mentioned, the general dynamics, I'm writing this wrong, is basically exchanging proposed texts until everyone is happy. Then both parties sign it, and that's it. Usually this is done digitally nowadays. Sometimes companies will require it to be a physical contract that you probably print, then sign every page and sign the final page with your complete signature, and then send it to them, usually 2 copies. Then they'll send both copies and send you back one of the copies with both signatures, right? Other times it will be done exactly like that, but over email and scanned contracts, right? So this is really very straightforward. About getting paid. So this could not be any more simple, but some people have doubts about that. So for example, if I'm in country A and my customer is in country B, is there a way to do that? And I cannot give you legal advice, but usually it's as easy as a money transfer, right? They can transfer it to your company account. If you have a company account, maybe you can do depending on where you are, there's a possibility of you making a contract with them without being a company, yourself, your legal entity, being the person signing the contract instead of being like you representing a company, for example. It depends, but depending on where you are, and there will be different options on how you can get paid, but the actual logistics tend to be simple, right? So I'll be talking about 2 aspects of it. The logistics of getting paid, and how when to charge them, right? When to charge the clients. So very simple recommendation, either a money transfer or PayPal. The advantage of this one is that it is, everyone knows it. My personal recommendation, and you have to check this for yourself, I'm just telling what works for me, is Payoneer, right? So this is the one I use when I want to charge customers for, whatever reason, right? So consultation customers, B2B stuff like this, I usually use Payoneer because it allows for international money transfer. And at last time I checked it had much lower rates and much better. It was basically a much better deal for you to receive your money than through PayPal. Now, not every country is supported by Payoneer, so you should check, and not for every type of transaction, but this basic idea is the same. So how does it work? You basically go there, create an account, you associate a bank account to your Payoneer account. They will request some documents that you have to scan and send it to them, or maybe just take a photo and send it to them. They will associate that, and they will be able to make money transfers for you, right? And then what you do is you are able of generating a payment request from within Payoneer. So you just go there, go into ask for money, for example, or request for ask for a payment. There's a button, we fill out a form where you describe the service and then how much it is, and then it will generate a link. You send that link to your customer. They will receive, actually it will generate an email that gets sent to your customer, and that email will have a button, right? Or you can send a link, which will be to a page, and that page will have a button that's basically saying pay now. The amount, the description that you wrote, and who you are, your name, and a button to pay. And then they will have access to several forms of payment, like credit card or whatever is available in their country, right? So you don't need to worry too much about that. Usually, because Payoneer is a pretty solid, pretty broad solution, right? And by the way, I don't get commissions for any of these recommendations that I give, right? So you hear me talking about Payoneer, ClickTeam Fusion, maybe some other software that I will recommend. I'm not being commissioned by any of those. I'm just telling what I use and that I recommend because I have researched it, right? So my personal recommendation, if it is available, Payoneer. But you have to research and check and make sure this works for you or in your country as well. Okay, now about how to charge and when to charge. It's more like when to charge the clients. I like to do it milestone based, right? So usually, for example, an upfront payments. So that could be like, for example, I don't know, 30% of the total amounts. Usually after each milestone. So for example, prototype approved, then alpha version approved, beta version approved, and final version delivered. In many of the contracts that I have worked with my company, the actual deliver meant we upload in the game an HTML5 game onto the client's server, right? So I got access by talking to their IT people. I got access to upload stuff on a specific folder in their server, and then I would upload that and be able to access the game through some address that I would just type in the browser, and then I would just send the customer the link, and they would click the link, and that would open their own website, the specific page on their website with the game embedded in that, right? So this was what the final version meant in several of my projects. Sometimes it can be like a Windows version if it's an executable, for example. So there's different types of technologies and projects, so it will vary a little bit. But usually it's not unusual for maybe receiving like 30% here, then maybe another, I don't know, 50% here, 15%, then another 15 here, another 15 here, and the remainder here. And by the way, don't memorize these numbers. This is just to give you a rough order of magnitude. So you are being paid a little bit less usually per deliverable than you are being paid here because you have some initial costs just to get started, right? Or you might have some initial costs. And sometimes there will be a bigger sum here than in the specific deliverables as well, because this is where the risk for the customer is gone, right? They can just pay you because you already delivered it to them, right? The more, obviously, the earlier you receive, the safer for you and riskier for the customer. The latest you receive, riskier for you and the safest for the customer. So of course, if you would ideally try to drive to you receiving 100% upfront. Ideally, the customer would only want to pay after everything is completed, right? So try to meet halfway, and this is a way to do that, right? This is why I suggest milestone based, because you are getting an initial payment, so you know that the customer is serious, that they have the money. Then you are doing some work, they are seeing the work getting done, and you are being paid, partially. It's basically dissolving the risks both for you and the customer when you use a model like this, right? So once again, don't memorize these numbers. That's the official way to do this in the markets, because Gabriel told me to use those numbers. I'm not telling you that. This is just a rough order of magnitude, just so that you understand the general logic, right? And usually this thing here will also be in your contract, right? So we can include that in your proposal, right? Maybe in the proposed methodology, that would make sense. And you can put that in your payment and price part as well, right? So usually you can even do something like this. So proposed schedule for deliverables and payments, right? And then you can add that to your proposal. And the main difference here would be something like this. For example, you know, starting from the signature of this contract, you know, in 15 days, actually no, this is on day 0. In 15 days there will be a prototype. Then I don't know, in 45 days, I'm not even sure how long we are talking about here. So let's just imagine, just for the sake of the example, that it is like this. For example, it's a 2 months project. So this is how it works, right? So to start an upfront payment, then in 15 days there will be a prototype, in 30 days will be an alpha version. And if you miscalculate these times, it's a problem that you have to handle, right? So make sure to be diligent when thinking about what you can promise and about how we will work in terms of method, which is this thing that we have discussed here, right? So be diligent about negotiating something that makes sense, that will not put you in a terrible situation when it comes to actually fulfilling the schedule that you are proposing, right? But usually you include that in your proposal and in your contract. And finally, general tips for managing your relationship with the clients. This is one of those things that will make all the difference from the first clients that you have and all the way to you having several customers after that or not. It defines if you'll be happy with working in B2B or not. And you need to define if the customer will be happy with having hired you or not. And some of these tips will actually even apply before you sign the contract, and you have a direct impact on the likelihood of them signing you to do that, right? So general tips: be transparent. Be transparent. It's better to give excessive information than too little information about what is going on, about how things work. And this is a balancing act as well, right? They don't really care about the fine-grained details of game development, but you need to educate them at least to the point where they can understand what's happening in the project, right? The risks, what might be go well or not. You have to speak professionally. Remember that they don't care as much about the ins and outs of toy making. You are the toy maker, they are not. But speak professionally in a language that they can understand. Treat them as intelligent people, not as stupid people, but also professionally, right? So keep it to the level of detail that's necessary for them to understand what's happening in the project at any moment, right? So it's better if you don't know where the line is. I would prefer to give a lot of information than too little information, right? Because this can blow up in your face. Okay, worst case scenario, if you give excessive information, they will think you are a little bit boring, that you talk too much, or that you write too lengthy emails. But here, they can be honestly surprised because something is completely different from what they expected, right? Be proactive. That is, talk about problems before they happen, not after they happen, right? Be proactive. Make sure to keep them in the loop. Also, understand that many times having a game that they are involved with. Having a game, no, I'm not sure. But having a game that they are involved with is somewhat of a dream to them. Either to the company owner or to the person that you are dealing directly in the customer. Maybe sometimes it's a dream because they like playing, they gave the idea, they sold that idea within the company to actually get you the money. They want it to work. And probably they have some sort of, some sort of fantasy on how that will work out. And that will mean them giving you ideas. Be respectful of those ideas, but also be professional, right? So be respectful and excited about their ideas, but also be professional. You are the pro here, right? I'm not telling you that you should be saying this to them. This is not being respectful. What I'm saying is you need to take ownership and take responsibility for making sure that the game will work, right? So if you keep promising stuff that will not work, you are not being professional, right? But that doesn't mean that you should be, undermining and saying no to everything that they suggest, right? If they give an idea, instead of thinking on how you can literally implement that, try to understand what they are trying to evoke there, what kind of things they are trying to make happen, and then you just go with like, this is a good idea, I understand. So this would make the game more complex or more interesting, and that sounds interesting. I'll see if I find a way to embed that into the game design in a way that doesn't break other stuff. But I really like, developing this area a little bit further. Be respectful, understand the intention, which does not mean that you need to implement exactly that. Now, if you're going to change what you're actually going to implement, then be proactive to communicate that and be transparent. All right. Also, so just to underscore the importance of this, I think last time when we took one big B2B work, it was in 2018, and I was actually in GDC at GDC in 2018. So you probably have seen photos on Twitter of that. And I was the person that had to call the customer and give updates. And I was in San Francisco many times in the hostel, like in the hotel room, or sometimes in the middle of the expo. And I would just leave for 5 minutes and record a message on WhatsApp, because that's the tool that we agreed to use to exchange information about the progress of the game that we were developing for that client. And I'll just record a 5 minutes audio saying, hey, so updates for the week. This is even a tip that I want to put it explicitly here. Give cadential updates. I'm not even sure if this is the best way to describe it. Give proactive updates every week, right? Choose a day, maybe every Friday or every Sunday at the end of the day. You write an email or you send an audio to the representative that's communicating with you about the game, whatever makes sense, but be proactive and give updates every week. So I would just do that. And if she would ask me any information, I would just answer to the level of detail that was necessary, right? So I could be talking to, I don't know, like a famous game developer that I'm friends with and that I have never been before together outside of a virtual environment, like in real life. And I'll just be, just wait for a minute. I have a client I need to answer back to her. Then I'll get back to you, right? But this is how important it is. This is how important it is. You need to be proactive. You need to treat them well. It's not like you get the money and then you're happy and then you start complaining about making the game. Remember that you signed the contract and that you were responsible for drafting the contract, right? So this is really important. And finally, for those of you who got here, I just wanted to please request that if you found this to be a helpful lecture, to consider the possibility of sharing the word about this initiative, because that's the way where it will grow, right? So if you want to make games professionally, if you want other people to have improved results as well, right? So you are participating in a community, in a Discord channel, I don't know, social media, and you have lots of people that you think would take a lot of benefit from these in-depth lectures on professional independent game development, please consider the possibility of sharing, right? So you are directly responsible for making sure that this initiative grows. And one of the best ways to do that is recommending them to come to proindiedev.com/guide, because this will take them to this page that happens to have a complete description for someone who doesn't really know what Pro Indie Dev is about. So you can pitch that a little bit and then send this link and recommend people, and that will be super helpful for me to grow this initiative, and hopefully for them as well, because this will help them improve their results. All right, so I do think we have fulfilled our goal of making probably one of the most complete lectures available on the internet about B2B game development. That's a real way for you to make money even early in your development, in your learning path, right? So even if you're not a pro, like a complete pro that can make highly competitive, super polished Steam games or PlayStation games yet, at some point you will, but this is a way to monetize the process and to be paid to learn and to be paid to get better, to generate portfolio, to put some food on the table and call yourself a real pro. So I'm really glad that you are here to this moment. Thank you very much for your audience, and I'll see you next week on the next lecture that we are here every single week, and also on Instagram. Take care.